This is a Nokia phone. Chances are you've seen one or probably even owned one at some point. They made some of the best-selling phones of all time, and they were the #1 phone provider in the world for almost 10 years. Nowadays, that market share has dropped to less than 1%. So what happened? How does the #1 phone manufacturer in the world just disappear? Let's go back to the beginning. For a phone company, they've actually been around for quite a while. They were founded in Nokia, Finland in 1865 by 3 Finnish men, whose names I am not going to try to pronounce. The original founder, Frederick, spun it off of his paper-making business that he had started in the 1850s. Their original product was just that, paper, and they got really good at making paper. They built large paper-making factories and quickly expanded across Europe, becoming the first Finnish company to become publicly traded on the stock exchange in 1950. They continued this way until the 1960s, when they started acquiring a bunch of different companies. Most importantly, they bought a rubber company and a cable company. They started producing a whole slew of products, like paper, tires, and televisions. From then on, they continued to diversify their business by just buying out every company that was for sale. In 1981, they acquired Mobira, a Finnish mobile phone company, and they began making consumer electronics. Throughout the 80s, they released several mobile and car phones, most notably the Mobira Cityman 900 in 1987, which became famous after the phone was photographed being used by former Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev. By the late 80s, all of these various businesses had become too much for the company, so they dropped their rubber and paper businesses to focus on consumer electronics and cell phones. And boy, did they. The 90s were a golden age for Nokia. They invested a lot of time and money into making consumer cell phones. They released a lot of great phones in these years, most notably the 2110, the 6110, the 9000 communicator, and the 8110. That last one became pretty famous for being featured in the hit 1999 film, The Matrix. Known as the banana phone, the cover didn't actually pop out like it does in the movie. It was rigged in this shot to make it seem more futuristic. In part, thanks to the sales driven from that movie, in 1999, Nokia became the #1 phone manufacturer in the world, surpassing Motorola. By now, they had become iconic in the phone space for their iconic ringtone, candy bar-shaped phone design, and Snake pre-installed on every phone. This was also the year they released the 3210. At the time, it was the best-selling phone of all time, and to this day, it still sits at number 7 with 161 million units sold worldwide.
Nokia, connecting people.
Their phones were doing numbers due to their inexpensive and durable design. Probably their most iconic phone to this day came out in 2000, the Nokia 3310, known for being virtually indestructible. It is to this day the 19th best-selling phone of all time. Their golden age continued well into the 2000s. They released some really amazing phones, like the 1100, 1110, 6600, and the 5230. They released the world's first 3G phone, as well as the iconic lipstick phone that was featured in the famous Pussycat Doll video, Beep. To this day, these phones, along with a few others from Nokia, occupy 10 of the 20 best-selling phones list, including the first 2 slots. They were on top of the world, but after every rise, there's a fall. In 2008, Nokia's global market share was 38.6%. That meant that 1 out of every 3 phones sold in 2008 was a Nokia. I don't think there's a single company that has had that much of a monopoly on the space, ever before that, or even since. That year alone, they made $50 billion of revenue, which was actually less than the year before, but their historic rise to power peaked in 2008, and they never recovered. The release of the iPhone in 2007 completely changed the smartphone market. I've said this before, companies had to completely drop what they were doing and scramble just to keep up with what iPhone had come out with. Nokia didn't really change their strategy after the release of the iPhone. Sure, they made some touchscreen phones, but they were devoted to their old business model: cheap, durable, candy bar phones. They stuck with the keypad for the most part, even after the success of the iPhone and then similar Android devices. They tried to make some genuine Android competitors with Symbian, but just like when BlackBerry tried to make touchscreen phones, these phones were half-baked and didn't really offer anything compelling. The following year saw a 20% dip in profits, followed by 4 years of slow decline. People were still buying their phones, but Nokia was slowly losing relevance. Their phones were popular with a large enthusiast market, who didn't like these new phone designs and were looking for something cheaper. Speaking of which, if you want me to do a video on how popular dumb phones have gotten recently, let me know down below. Their business was still incredibly successful, but less so than it used to be. If you know anything about capitalism, this was bad for the company. Even though they were still doing relatively well, it was worse than the year before, so they were considered a failing business. In 2011, the current CEO put out a memo to the whole company, and it kind of sums up what was going on with the situation. He starts the memo with a story about a man who wakes up on a burning platform. He goes on to say, "We too are standing on a burning platform, and we must decide how we are going to change our behavior." He describes intense heat coming from our competitors more rapidly than we ever expected. Apple disrupted the market by redefining the smartphone and attracting developers to a closed but very powerful ecosystem. He then goes on to say later in the email, "While competitors poured flames on our market share, what happened at Nokia? We fell behind, we missed big trends, and we lost time. At that time, we thought we were making the right decisions. But with the benefit of hindsight, we now find ourselves years behind. The first iPhone shipped in 2007, and we still don't have a product that is close to their experience. Android came onto the scene over 2 years ago, and this week they took our leadership position in smartphone volumes. Unbelievable. We have some brilliant sources of innovation inside Nokia, but we are not bringing it to market fast enough. The problem, as he describes it, is our competitors aren't taking our market share with devices. They're taking our market share with an entire ecosystem." What he's specifically talking about here is the outdated software on all of their devices. Nokia was never a software company, and that didn't matter if all you needed to do on your phone was text, call, and email. But phones had been advancing at an incredible rate over the last 10 years, and Nokia hadn't really caught up. Now that phones had full touchscreens, a bunch of apps, and so many more features, good software was mandatory to make the phone popular and a good experience. Nokia had been using Symbian for all their attempted modern devices, and it just wasn't good in a modern age. Here, I'll let the CEO describe what he thinks about it. "Symbian is proving to be an increasingly difficult environment in which to develop to meet the continuously expanding consumer requirements, leading to slowness in production development and also creating a disadvantage when we seek to take advantage of new hardware platforms. As a result, if we continue like before, we will get further and further behind, while our competitors advance further and further ahead." It's pretty obvious he knew Symbian wasn't working. He ends the email with a call to action. He says they need to change or be killed. He says, when referring to their operation system, this means we're going to have to decide how we either build, catalyze, or join an ecosystem. The end of that sentence is pretty ominous, and it's foreshadowing what's to come. He's essentially saying that if they can't beat big tech giants like Google or Apple, he'd have to join them. Effective nearly immediately, Nokia launched a new line of smartphones. They were modern and unique, and most importantly, they used a brand new operating system from Microsoft, the Windows Phone. They called it the Lumia line, and these phones are actually pretty neat. In 2013, they took it a step further and sold their devices and services business, so pretty much the whole company, to Microsoft for 5.4 billion euros, which by the way, was a fraction of what they made in the previous year. They were kind of blackmailed into selling their phone division to Microsoft, but that's a story for another day. Their CEO was a former exec at Microsoft.
Yeah, I don't think I explained this well enough. There's a whole nother video that somebody else made that explains this topic way better than I ever could, so check it out down below after this video. All right. Back to the video.
All you need to know is that this decision basically tanked the company. From now on, Nokia is 2 companies. Group 1 is Nokia Phones, which was now owned by Microsoft. Group 2, the Nokia company, was everything else. I've already made a whole video about the failure of that first group. You can check it out right there, but chances are if you're on my channel, you've already seen that video. The second group also did a pretty poor job for the next few years. There wasn't much left of their business, honestly. They sold consumer electronics and made a decent amount of money every year, but it was a fraction of what they made back in the 2000s. They needed something big to shake up their business and become super profitable again. And that something big happened in 2016. Nokia was being shook up for a second time. Not quite. 2016 was big, but not that big. 2 major things happened. 1, Microsoft gets rid of Nokia's phone division. They sell it for a fraction of what they bought it to HMD Global, which was a tech firm run by some of the same guys who used to work at Nokia. So Nokia Phones is back in the family. The second thing is what happened to Group 2. They acquired Bell Labs. Now, if you haven't heard of Bell Labs, they're important for 2 reasons. 1, I talked about them in a previous video. You can check it out right there. Basically, they helped make the first cellular network, and were in direct competition with Motorola to make the first cellular phone. 2, they may just be the coolest company ever. It's an R&D lab that was kind of sort of started by Alexander Graham Bell. Kind of. They're credited with inventing, among other things, the C++ coding language, the transistor, radio astronomy, solar panels, the freaking laser, and the Unix operating software. What? That is the craziest resume I have ever heard. And the craziest part of all this, the lab where they did most of that stuff, it's like 2 hours from my house. Okay, so Group 1 is back in slightly better hands than Microsoft, and Group 2 just got a whole lot bigger. Group 2 continues to make consumer electronics, and they continue to invent random tech to this day. They're actually quite profitable. Group 1 makes boring, uninspired Android phones, and they have less than a 1% market share. Well, crap, what happened there? How many times am I going to make a video about a once popular phone company that's name is being used by a different company to sell bland Android phones? It's happened like 3 times now. Kind of crazy that that's happened more than once. So basically, since 2013, Nokia has been split into 2 different companies. Their once famous phone business has essentially failed. It's just gone. All that's left over is probably the most boring smartphones I have ever seen. What's left of Nokia is thriving and doing pretty well for themselves without the phones. They don't make phones anymore, but they do make some awesome stuff, thanks to their merger with Bell Labs. But you want to know what else is awesome? That we made it to 10,000 subscribers. That's just awesome. I can't even fathom how many people that is. Thank you so much, dude. But of course, a special thanks to my members: Juno Knight, Toru, Aaron, Gustavo Rodriguez, Cameron Lewis, and Moyle Soil Boyle Foil. Thank you guys so much. Party on, dudes.